If your Toyota has part-time 4WD, 4H on dry pavement can literally make the front and rear axles try to rotate at the same speed during a turn. That's not extra grip. That's drivetrain binding, and it can lead to expensive stress you never intended to create. Today, I'm breaking down the buttons and modes the average owner actually touches. 2 hours versus 4 hours versus 4 liters. What locked really means. And the one situation where using 4 hours on-road might make sense, without guessing and without gambling on your truck. Here's the problem. You can flip into 4H, take it easy, stay under the speed limit, and still be making your truck fight itself every time you turn the wheel. Nothing feels wrong at first, so people keep driving. That's how the damage sneaks in. It usually starts in the most innocent way. It rains, the roads get shiny, and you twist the dial or hit the button for 4 hours because it feels like the safe move. The truck feels more planted pulling away from a stoplight, so you leave it on. Then the weather clears up. You run errands, grocery store, school pickup, a few miles of dry pavement between wet patches. Hours later, 4H is still on and you've been turning into parking spots the whole time. That's when the signs show up and most people explain them away. The steering starts to feel tight, like the truck doesn't want to rotate at low speed. In a parking lot, you might feel a little hop from the tires, almost like the rubber is skipping across the asphalt. On a sharp turn, you can get a faint groan or a chirp. And because it happens during slow maneuvering, it feels like extra traction doing its job. But that sensation isn't grip. It's stress building up. To understand why, you only need the simple layout. The engine makes power, the transmission passes it along, then it hits the transfer case. After that, you have a front drive shaft going to the front differential and a rear drive shaft going to the rear differential. The differentials split power left and right, so your inside and outside tires can rotate at different speeds during a turn. The transfer case is the traffic cop in the middle deciding whether the front axle gets driven and how it connects to the rear. In 2H on a part-time system, it's simple. The transfer case sends power to the rear drive shaft only. The front driveline mostly coasts, and your truck turns normally because the front and rear axles aren't forced to stay in sync. In 4H on that same part-time setup, the transfer case couples the front output to the rear output. The key detail is that it does not allow the normal speed difference between the front and rear axles while you're turning. Both axles get locked into the same average rotation, even though the truck is asking them to do different jobs. Here's the everyday reality of a turn. The front axle takes a slightly different path than the rear axle. Even when you're not thinking about it, the front tires tend to travel a different distance and need a different average speed. When the surface is loose, snow, gravel, mud, the tires can slip a little and release that difference. When the surface has a lot of grip, dry pavement, it can't release it easily. So the driveline starts storing that mismatch like a wound-up spring. Why does using 4H on dry pavement create expensive binding that can destroy your transfer case? Because that stored twist has to go somewhere. It loads the transfer case chain or gears, it pounds on U-joints and CV joints, it pushes on bearings, and it can even stress the case itself. You may also notice the truck feels like it unwinds with a bang when you finally get onto a slick patch or straighten out. That's the torsional load releasing. The highest risk moment is slow, full lock steering. Think tight U-turns, driveways with a sharp angle, and parking garages. At full lock, the front and rear axles disagree the most about how fast they should be rotating, and the binding builds quickly. You can do real harm without ever going faster than 10 miles an hour. The rule that prevents most of this is simple. If your Toyota has part-time 4WD, 4H is for surfaces where the tires can slip a little, consistently. If the road is mostly dry, go back to 2H and slow down instead of forcing the truck to do something it can't do smoothly. Now that you know what binding feels like and why it happens, the next thing that matters is figuring out which system your Toyota actually has. Part-time or full-time, and what those buttons mean on your exact dashboard. So how can two Toyotas both say 4WD, yet one can live in 4HI every day and the other starts complaining the second you pull into a dry parking lot? The difference isn't luck. It's whether your truck has a center differential in the middle of the system, or whether it's basically locking front and rear together anytime you touch 4H. You can sort most Toyotas into two buckets just by looking at the options on the dash. Bucket 1 is part-time 4WD, 2H, 4H, and 4L. In normal driving, it's rear-wheel drive, and you only add the front axle when the surface demands it. Bucket 2 is full-time 4WD, which works more like an AWD setup day-to-day. All four wheels can be driven, and you get a separate mode to lock the center differential when you need it. This is where the labels start messing with people. 4HI and 4HI lock are not the same promise, and that lock button on your Toyota might not be a rear locker at all. On a lot of models, it's a center diff lock, which is a completely different job than a locking rear differential. The center lock ties the front and rear drive shafts together. A rear locker ties the left and right rear wheels together. Two different parts, two different risks, and the dash doesn't always spell it out. What happens inside your transfer case when you shift from 2H to 4H that changes everything? In a part-time system, the transfer case engages the front drive output and couples it to the rear output. That means the transfer case is now forcing the front and rear drive shafts to rotate together. In a full-time system, the transfer case routes power through a center differential first, and that center diff can allow the front and rear to rotate at different speeds while you turn. That's why some Toyotas can run in 4 high on dry roads without binding. But the moment you hit center diff lock, you remove that speed difference and you're back in the same locked state you'd get from a part-time truck in 4 high. Use it when it's slippery or off-road, then turn it off as soon as you're back on normal traction. Now 4L people treat 4L like a super 4WD button, but it's really a gearing change. Low range multiplies torque and slows everything down so you can crawl with control. It's for steep climbs where you need steady throttle, steep descents where you want engine braking, deep mud where momentum is risky, rocks where you need precise tire placement, or a careful self-recovery when you're stuck and you don't want wheel spin. Most Toyotas want you stopped, or almost stopped, and often in neutral before 4L engages. That's because you're shifting a separate set of gears inside the transfer case. If the teeth aren't lined up and you force it while rolling, you can grind, shock load the drivetrain, or jam the shift mechanism.